to send you away from today, not just with information about the past, but also with an understanding of the fact that you can evaluate the past yourself. So it's a training day for future historians. So we're going to start off with the prehistoric world. And I put up here the word prehistoric astrology. And that in itself is a controversial claim. I'll tell you why. It all comes down to the way in which we define astrology. What is astrology? That's a question which often people who do the MA in cultural astronomy and astrology, they get to the end of the MA and having entered the MA thinking they know what astrology is, they graduate without knowing what it is at all. Which is very liberating. It's very liberating not to know what things are. So anyway, I just here's the book on the left, from which all the material I'm talking about today is taken. I won't be talking about any material which is not actually in the book. And on the right-hand side is volume 2. I've just been told by the publishers that they're dropping the titles, The Dawn of Astrology and the Golden Age of Astrology, so they will be simply History of Western Astrology, volume 1 and 2. But the cover will remain the same. So, okay, ancient astronomy or astrology. This is the issue. The whole area of looking at the way in which ancient people related to the sky is dominated by historians of astronomy. And therefore, necessarily, the view of the past falls into the modern argument between astronomers and astrologers over, it's the political turf war, over who has the right to talk about the way in which people relate to the stars. Now, modern astrologers get a bit bemused by this modern conflict, but it's a very active one for most astronomers who deny astrology's modern legitimacy and right for astrologers to talk about the stars. They may have a point, they may not. That's not my issue. The issue is that argument gets translated into the past so that the history of astrology gets written out of the past. And so if you look at books on the history of astronomy, then you'll find you'll find often a sentence that says, well, of course, in the past, astronomy and astrology were closely related, or were the same thing. And then you might think, well, why isn't there more about it in this book on the history of astronomy? And you look in the index, and you look under astrology, page 16. That's it. Nothing, in other words. So astrology as a concept is written out of the past. Now, there's another reason as to why that has happened, which is not purely to do with the antagonism between modern astronomers and astrologers. It's to do with how we define astrology. If any of us, if we wanted to do this, you sit down with a dozen astrologers and you ask them what astrology, you ask them to write down a definition of astrology, you get a dozen different definitions. And that's, can't be human, isn't it? We all come up with our own words to describe the same phenomenon. So, we've got to deal with this issue because there's a particular historian, a very great historian called David Pingree, who defined the way that academics think about astrology. Okay, so this is David Pingree's definition below. David Pingree is he was a scholar who died last year, and without him many of the resources which are now used by astrologers who are looking at the past would not exist. So he's an absolutely remarkable scholar. But he defined astrology like this. He said it's the study of the impact of the celestial bodies. Okay, so he's using the word impact. There's a sense there of the celestial bodies impacting on us. It's like a physical consequence, even if they impact on our minds. There's still the image of a physical impact on the minds. Moon, Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, fixed stars, and sometimes the lunar nodes upon the sub-lunar world. Well, this word sub-lunar is incredibly important. The Greek philosopher Aristotle lived and wrote around the year 300 BC. He was an incredibly influential man. He was tutor to the great conqueror Alexander the Great. Very, very famous, well-known, influential figure. He worked with a model of the cosmos in which, we'll come to a diagram of this later, but all the planets orbiting around the Earth at the middle. And so, like this, here's the Earth at the middle, and you get the planets orbiting around, and here's the Moon, the innermost. And so between the Moon and the Earth is the sublunar world. So the word sublunar refers to Aristotle's model of the cosmos. Now, Aristotle also argued that the way in which the planets impact on the Earth is through mechanical forces, which could be transmitted through light, through movement, through influence, through the fact that the planets have material qualities. Mars is hot and dry, for example. So Aristotle's philosophy was designed to focus people's attention on the natural world. Now, the astrology, which was later based on Aristotle's thought, was quite naturalistic. You could have a medical astrology based heavily on Aristotle's thought, but it deals in influence. So, this the kind of astrology which David Pingree defined is based on the assumption that there are such things as planetary influences. Now, there may and there may not be. That's not our concern. Our concern is with understanding the way in which astrology is seen. Now, this was a Greek model. Aristotle was a Greek, and therefore historians following David Pingree have identified astrology as fundamentally Greek and fundamentally requiring the celestial influences. And if it doesn't have those two things, it's then not astrology. So that's a very narrow definition. The consequence is that historians looking at the astrology of ancient Babylon, which predated Greek, have sometimes had to conduct all sorts of fancy footwork in order to talk about what they're doing without calling it astrology. Astral divination, astromancy, astral religion, for example. Even David Pingree got stuck in this trap. He had to use the term Babylonian astrology at the same time as denying that the Babylonians did astrology. So, but from here, you see, you move to a dictionary definition like this. Astrology, practical astronomy. We could analyse this definition more, but art of judging reputed occult influence of stars upon human affairs. So, the influence. So, where does that leave us if you think that the stars or planets represent signs, an astrology of signs, as in the Star of Bethlehem? When the Star of Bethlehem shone, 3 wise men, the 3 magi saw it. The story is related in the Gospel of Matthew. Nowhere does it say that this star influenced the 3 wise men to go and find the infant Jesus Christ, and that the star exerted an influence on Jesus Christ. No, it was a sign sent from God to alert the 3 wise men that the Messiah was being born, or the new prophet was being born. Now, according to this narrow definition, the Star of Bethlehem is not an astrological phenomenon. So, and that's why you don't get books which talk about prehistoric astrology. And that's why to talk about prehistoric astrology before the concept of influence is a political act. So here's the definition, which I always use. This is the definition. This is the official supplier centre definition. Patrick Curry, who taught with me at Bath Spa, is also now a tutor at Lampeter. The practice of relating the heavenly bodies to lives and events on earth, and the tradition that has thus been generated. So, now this is a carefully constructed definition. The practice. There's a direct challenge there to the notion that astrology is a belief system. A challenge to the notion of it's a challenge to the thought processes that go through people's minds when meeting somebody who's interested in astrology. You say, do you believe in it? So you're taking belief out of the equation, saying it's practice, it's just something that people do, and relating the heavenly bodies to lives and events on earth. Well, relating them, the relationship can be in any way. You know, it doesn't matter what the relationship is. So we can have influences, if we like. Mars can be a hot, dry planet causing drought, but you can also have signs. Mars can be a sign of war. Or you might have an astrology of correlations, in which the Mars cycle correlates with hot, feverish events. Or you might have, as Carl Jung sometimes implied, a projection, in which the astrological process can be seen to begin with an individual, and you see Mars, and you say, oh, I'm me, the astrologer, understanding Mars as right. So Patrick is allowing for any kind of practice, and I've always favoured broad definitions of astrology. I remember a discussion I had with somebody many years ago about the launching of ships. I mean, for example, say you take, say you are asked by say you were a medieval astrologer, and you were asked by a ship owner to elect an auspicious horoscope for launching your ship. Well, you'd have to do it during a high tide. No use doing it when Jupiter and Venus are auspiciously placed if there's a low tide. So, in other words, you know, the astrology, or any view of what astrology is, has to encompass the physical, obviously physical, and the completely psychic. And another example, of course, is the justification, the natural justification, which we all know that astrology works as a matter of influences. We know that influences exist because the moon has an astrology which goes back to Claudius Ptolemy 1900 years ago. And there's scientific objections to it, but as historians, all we need to know is that the justification is there, and that it was considered obvious that there are such things as celestial influences. So if we went back to the Middle Ages, and you were to say to anybody that you didn't believe in celestial influences, they think you were mad, because when the sun rises, it gets hot and light. And now all we've done in the modern world is detach the sun providing heat and light from astrology. So the goalposts have moved. So a broad definition of astrology has to include daylight, suntan, and such things as astrological phenomena. So that's what, in my local street, we have a street party every summer solstice. So the first one was the first one, and by the second one it was a tradition. So traditions are really fuzzy things. Okay, so if we use our first definition of our quotations, this is always becoming a sort of our centre statement here, because my fellow tutors, Bernadette Brady and Liz Green, also when taking all this French philosopher Bruno Latour, also a favourite of Patrick Cummings. No one has ever, this is what Latour said, he wrote a book called We Have Never Been Modern, and he said, no one has ever heard of a collective that did not mobilise heaven and earth in its composition, along with bodies and souls, property and law, gods and ancestors, powers and beliefs, beasts and fictional beings, such as the ancient anthropological matrix, the one we have never abandoned. Now, this quote, the reason I'm telling you this is because this also goes straight to the heart of the way that the history of astrology is dealt with. Now, Bruno Latour's book was called We Have Never Been Modern. So, it's widely thought that we live in a modern world. Now, we can see the modern world has either just been, it's the latest phase of history, the period we live in, it's modish, fashionable. But there's an idea as well that to be modern is somehow better than to be in the past. It's part of Western progress theory. Things that are new are better than things which are old. The modern is good. And this is an idea which very much runs through the history of science, seen as an ascent of human knowledge and technical achievement up to a high point in the present day. Well, technology has developed. That doesn't mean to say that necessarily things have got qualitatively better. So, one of the key question that started me on my academic career was a statement that is made by a lot of people who comment on modern astrology. Well, they've got a question. It's a question. They ask the question: how can people believe in astrology in the modern world? So this the way the question is framed. In a modern world where we've got aeroplanes and iPods and all these other wonderful things, how can people still believe in a superstition like astrology? And that was the key question I took to start off with my academic research. And of course the answer to that question is simple. Is that technology may have advanced, but we human beings are fundamentally the same as we were 4, 5, 6, 7, 90, 80,000 years ago. That's what Latour is saying. We are the same. We should not take the development of technology as an indication that the human need for meaning in life has disappeared. It hasn't. It's still there. So one answers the question: how come people in the modern world still believe in astrology? By saying, well, it's quite natural to believe in astrology. In fact, some sociologists are now, well, they've challenged concepts like paranormal. This word, paranormal. Say, how can the paranormal exist? Well, there are sociologists who say, hang on, effectively the paranormal is normal. The fringe is actually the mainstream. You know, the alternative is the majority view. And the idea is that the paranormal, the occult, the fringe alternative are somehow confined to minorities is actually can't be supported when you look at what people really do and what they think. So, let's go back then and look at this whole question of prehistoric astrology. And I'll give you my own distinction here between astronomy and astrology, because we have to have a working distinction. If we just look at astronomy as the measurement of celestial positions, that's astronomy, and astrology is, as Patrick said, any idea that there is a relationship between those positions and human life, or events, affairs on our planet. So, in other words, as soon as you get people constructing calendars, that's astrological. I will argue that the calendar construction is astrological, particularly as all calendars that we know of originally served a sacred function, and they were designed to ascertain the auspicious times to conduct religious rituals. But the new moon is the Babylonian New Year festival, is always the first new moon after spring equinox, for example. And so that is a form of electional astrology, establishing the most auspicious moment to conduct a religious ritual. So, now, what sort of evidence can we use to look at, say, prehistoric astrology? So, by prehistoric, I mean the historical period, and the division between the historic and the prehistoric is often taken to be the invention of writing. Anything before writing is prehistoric. And that, of course, it's not an entirely satisfactory distinction, but it's a good working one for our own culture and the cultures that our culture is descended from. So, if we're looking at prehistoric culture before writing, we don't have any written sources. No, there's nowhere where anybody's written down anything to do with the reasons why, for example, they built Stonehenge, which is why there's this sort of attempt to understand why, for example, Stonehenge was built. We've always got to interpret the evidence, and there are radical disagreements even going on at the moment between different archaeologists. So we've got the material evidence, including visual evidence, which we'll look at. And then there's the evidence from contemporary ethnography. Now this is a controversial area. So the argument runs like this: if you want to know how prehistoric people thought, say, in the British Isles before writing, can you go and look at societies in Polynesia or Africa or Australia, for example, which are pre-literate, have no writing, and can you extrapolate from those societies to say, well, probably people thought like this in the British Isles or Northwest Europe? And that's it's an argument which you can't ultimately resolve, but I think it's worth pursuing. So I think it's worth taking evidence from people in the 19th century, 20th century, in pre-literate societies, look at the stories they told, the way in which they related to stars, and say, well, maybe that's how the builders of Stonehenge would have thought. But we need to bear in mind that ultimately we can't get any completely satisfactory answers from that. And so to give you an example of how people behave in the present, you've got different kinds of people for whom Stonehenge is like an iconic site. Now, one of those groups of people are the Druids, the organised Druid orders, who will turn up at Stonehenge in their robes, conduct a solemn ritual. Rituals not unlike those you might find in the Church of England. Right? Staid and well behaved. And then you've got people who will go to Stonehenge, bang drums, take drugs, and so on, for whom the model is more one of sort of anarchic, shapeless ecstasy, an ecstatic journey to the stars or communion with the earth through music and drugs. So in other words, what if you go back to 4,000 years ago at Stonehenge, at the solstice, what would it have been like? Would the key celebrants have been in their robes, doing a graceful homage before the rising sun? Or would they have been wearing animal skins, rolling on the ground? Frankly, we don't know, but either is possible. So we've always got to bear in mind the competing possibilities. So, to go then right back, the first, our first session until the first break, I'm going to be running quickly through some of the really, really ancient evidence before Stonehenge culture, which will come on to after the break. So, 20,000 BC, around then, and beyond, when the world was a different place, partly because about 20,000, 18,000 years ago was the maximum glaciation of the last ice age. The ice was melting 10,000 years ago. One simple consequence of that is that all the coastal areas of the world by that point were submerged. So a huge amount of our own human history has been lost. There's a lot of underwater archaeology taking place at the moment, for example, in the North Sea. Just up here, there's the North Sea now, archaeologists refer to it as Doggerland. And 10,000 years ago, people lived there, thriving communities. As floods happened, people had to move to the uplands of the British Isles and down to France and Germany to escape the rising sea levels. And the same phenomenon affected all the coastal areas of the world. You can see the whole of Southeast Asia, if you can see that, was submerged. So we deal with uncertainty. This is, I think, a very important feature of dealing with ancient history. One can abandon the search for certainty. What you can do is try and understand and abandon the search for certainty. So, this is then around 13,000 BC. This doesn't show. This shows the post-ice melt coastal areas in Southeast Asia as now individual islands. But by this time, there are human beings all over the world, Northern Australia, China, Lascaux in France, which we'll talk about, in Patagonia. They spread. Human beings have spread. Now, the conventional current theory is that Homo sapiens, our particular branch of monkey, the Homo sapiens moved probably from Africa initially westwards around 80,000 years ago. You know, this is the conventional current wisdom. It may be overturned in the future. And it would have moved up here, and then from this region eventually spread over the land bridge to South America and spread west to Europe, where they encountered Neanderthals and like that, and probably also gone from Europe across to North America as well, because across this area here was the edge of a glaciated ice sheet, so that people could sail across the edge of the ice sheet from Europe into North America. There's some DNA evidence that happened. Okay, so let's jump straight into some of the material remains, the material artifacts we've got, and try and build up a picture of the astrology of the old Stone Age, the Paleolithic period, before 10,000 BC. This is probably, I'm sure, quite a few of you have seen this image because it's very famous, because it is absolutely unique and very graphic. It's, we have to assume it's a goddess image. No, there's no caption on it saying this is a goddess, but it's a fair assumption. And there's a lot of these images that survive from the old Stone Age, 20,000 to 30,000 BC, and a lot of them are very small, like a couple of inches high, often with very pointed features, very abstract. Not figurative at all, abstract pointed heads, pointed breasts, pointed arms. So you get to about 3,000 or 4,000 BC, and there's some examples of some which we'll look at, some enormous great, particularly from the island of Malta, great goddess figurines, sort of this size. The Venus of Lausel is kind of figurative. You can see there a woman's body. And the reason that it's so interesting is because she's holding something. She's holding this object here, which none of the other known figurines have got anything like this. So she comes from Lausel in the Dordogne in France, probably around 20,000 BC. Give or take. But, all our dating for such artifacts is liable to move by several thousand years, just if a new piece of evidence is discovered or analysed. So she's about 43 centimetres, 17 inches high, so about that height. With one hand on her belly, and you have to assume that the individual who carved this didn't just do this by accident, it's all intentional. On the belly, indicating pregnancy / fertility. Now, the crescent-shaped object has 13 notches on it, so presumably also not accidental. It might just be that the individual carver's got the 13 and there wasn't any more space. But otherwise, the other alternative is that it's 13 for 13 lunar months. And some archaeologists have said, well, this isn't a moon, it's a drinking horn, quite obviously. But why can't a drinking horn also be a moon? The symbolism is multi-layered, has many levels. An apple in a medieval painting is always a symbol of temptation. in the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. This is how it's read. So a drinking horn perhaps from a rhinoceros. It's a crescent shape. It's a moon. Put 13 notches on it, and it becomes a moon. There was a red ochre on the belly, which some people said then is going to be an indication of menstruation, but could also be either the sun or the moon. Now, could be the moon. The moon goes red at a lunar eclipse. I've seen a good, clear lunar eclipse. The moon goes an orangey red, which is kind of shocking. It's outside of the normal range of colours. Could be the sun. Now, some people will respond to that and say, well, the sun's male and the moon's female. But actually, it's not the case at all. In most cultures, the sun is female, and many cultures, the moon is male. For example, the Japanese sun goddess, Amaterasu, is a goddess. No reason at all why the sun and moon have to have the gender descriptions which we've inherited from Greek culture. In Babylonian astrology, the moon is male, for example. So could be solar or lunar. So up in the sky, it could be she's called the Venus. Okay, now Venus is just code for goddess. She may be nothing to do with Venus, but she might be. But she might be a sky goddess who ruled over or represented both the sun and moon, a great mother who presided over heaven and earth. A multifaceted character. One problem about the way in which we look back and see ancient religion is we're very keen to get sort of precise encyclopedic meanings for ancient gods and goddesses, who they were, who their divine parents were, what they ruled, and so on. And that actually doesn't work really for ancient religion. If you've got issues like that, there were local variations, fluid multiple identifications between particular deities, and overlapping rulerships and so on. So we've got a figure here, clearly important, who might have functioned in all sorts of different and various ways, perhaps different ways at different times of year. So, now, this issue of notches leads us on to the work of this guy here, Alexander Marshak. Now, Alexander Marshak was a Harvard archaeologist. This is his main book here, The Roots of Civilization. You see, Marshak's work mentioned in quite a lot of books, but his own, but often without attribution to him. And his own book is actually well worth looking at, because actually the only book of its kind, because nobody else has really continued Marshak's work. Now, how Marshak got started will become clear after the break. A lot of work was being done around Stonehenge and British stone sites in the 1960s. And Marshak noticed this, and began to be turned on by the idea that Stone Age people could be sophisticated astronomers. And so Marshak noticed that in museums around the world, there were a lot of bones, tusks, horns, and other animal remains with notches on them, which had not been interpreted. People just ignored them and thought, no, either they're cracking or people who sat around in their caves bored late at night putting notches on animal bones for the sake of it. Anyway, So, this is one of the artifacts which Marshak analysed. I've chosen this one because it's also 20,000 BC-ish. It's approximately the same period as the Venus of Marcel. And it's also from France. So, same geographical location, same period roughly as the Venus. But in fact, a lot of these known artifacts come from Europe. And that's partly because Europe has been heavily studied by archaeologists, but we've got examples from all over the world. Australia, South Africa, the Americas. People were putting notches in bones, stones, tusks, so on, all over the world. And this wasn't just some great kind of Stone Age group notching bones from the same place. So if you can see this, I'll show you a drawing of it in a minute. You can see that they are in strength in lines, like this. They are very carefully done. I mean, it's amazing that Marshak did this work and nobody else is looking at it. There's an amazing area of potential study here. And so this is the drawing of it. This is the Barna Grandi pedal. So it's a piece of stone. This one. And there are the lines with the notches going around the corner here. That's because they got to the end of the stone. So this is not weathering, it's not fracking, it's deliberate, it's intentional, and it's designed. And so Marshak then analysed the rows, and this is all written up in his book, and his analysis of this is that there were 5 solstices. Now they could be summer or winter solstices. Okay, so we've got there 1, 2, 3, 4. I think there's one, maybe that's one. Anyway, 5 Marshak solutions, 5 solstices over 3.5 years. 3.5 years, maybe just this particular stone. I'm thinking here, actually, something else. Well, I may be just free associating too much, but in the Old Testament, so we're looking at it much later than this, but for example, in the book of Daniel, there's a periods occur which are very important in the Old Testament, the later Old Testament prophets, which is described as times and a half. Time is 1 year, times is 2 years, so that is 3 years, and a half is half a year, so 3.5 years. So I'm just kind of pre-associating here, but I'm wondering in what sense there might perhaps be some tradition of 3.5 years being an important period. Anyway, so this is Marshak's solution to this particular 20,000-year-old item. Now it doesn't matter if we're looking at summer solstice or winter solstice. So, you know, at Stonehenge, everybody gathers at the summer solstice. But the current archaeological view is that the winter solstice that was more important in terms of ancient celebrations. And one can construct a perfectly good sort of metaphysical rationale for that. The winter solstice, because the winter solstice is the point of death. The sun is lowest, coldest, darkest, and then it begins to grow lighter, hotter, and higher. So it's a point of salvation and resurrection. So probably there could be winter solstices. I think that would be the current archaeological point of view. Now, Marshak's work kind of exists in a vacuum. Nobody, as far as I know, is really continuing it in any sort of systematic manner, and neither has it been challenged. You know, the theories about Stonehenge, for example, caused huge disputes between astronomers and archaeologists. But Marshak's work caused little interest or attention or controversy for some reason. It just sort of exists there as remarkable evidence about ancient astrology, which nobody has really continued. So, but if you put together, you know, the pebble and the Venus, then we've got a culture both keeping very, very meticulous records and producing powerful religious symbolic iconography in celestial manner. Here's another one. This is a lunar counter, also from the Dordogne. I'm showing this because it's also France, so it's the same kind of area. Piece of bone. This is the piece of bone here. You can see lines like this. And here's a drawing of it. And there's how Marshak thinks that it went. So if we start here, it goes like that. So on the drawing, it's a lunar cycle which goes like that. And on the stone itself, you start here and then go like that. And if there was any symbolism to this shape, we don't know what it is. It may just be that whoever was keeping this, what Marshak has identified as a lunar calendar, was just attempting to be economical with the space and start at the middle and then have to try and get all the phases on the same stone. So, okay, we've got Venus, the image, a solar calendar, and a lunar calendar, all from around the same area on France. Oh, this is, like I've just reproduced here Marshak's own reasoning, so we can see this. He says, so this is the, going back to the Abbé Blanchard bone, the solar counter. He says, I tested the figure against the lunar model. Assuming a beginning around invisibility, I conjectured. Hang on, sorry, this is the lunar one I just showed you. I tested the figure against the lunar model, assuming a beginning around invisibility. I conjectured that the arc, the crescent-shaped mark in mid-figure, was perhaps the last visible crescent in the start of the rotation. I then laid out the 69 marks sequentially against the model. The result was astonishing. If this were lunar, the days of invisibility fell at the right, at the point of turning, and the full moon periods fell at the left, at the point of turning. So he's arguing that this zigzag figure is an oscillation between new and full moon periods. While half moons, quarter moons all fell at mid-figure. If lunar, he says we had a visual, kinesthetic, symbolic representation of the waxing and waning, which at any point indicated to the maker where in the lunar month he was, and did this non-arithmetically. When the maker finished his notation, the full serpentine figure represented 2 months or moons. And because of my previous work, I was even prepared for the fact the notation ended at the half moon. Could this be chance? He said, and he asked, as a good scientist. Was I seeing what I wished to see, what I had prepared myself to see? And of course his answer is no. He is seeing a remarkable 20,000 or up to even 30,000 50-year-old lunar calendar. So this is a piece of, here we get into speculation about modern ethnography. This is a quotation I got by Jane Goodall, Tiwi wives of studying the moon of Melville Island, so Melville Island in the Pacific. Moon makes baby come. When the moon is full, the woman knows her time is near. So this strikes me, I mean, being human, we can take evidence for ourselves, we are human beings, we can be our own evidence. Is this not exactly the kind of form of words which one could easily associate with the Venus of La Salle and a lunar calendar? This is the ethnographic evidence. We move on from the sun and the moon to the cave of Lascaux. Here's Lascaux, southern France, around 15,000 BC. Now, around 15,000 BC, the glacial ice sheet came down to about here, cut across, here's London, cut across just north of London, and then curved up like this, so the whole of the North Sea was land, was occupied, and so was this area of sea here. Although the ocean probably would have come in a bit, but it's occupied. So this is pretty cold, this whole area. This is Arctic tundra. So the climate in Lascaux would be pretty difficult. Now, at Lascaux, there's a whole series of caves. Which go down deep into the ground. Now, one thing about caves, very obvious to say, but caves are dark. Now, sometimes, the blindingly obvious really helps us in these times of electric light to understand the function of ancient cave art, because most of the time people couldn't see it. So we've got that in Lascaux, images like this. Here's an aurochs, a now extinct large bull. So this was not to be hung on somebody's wall. It was not on a cliff face out in the sunlight. It was impossible to see, except with some effort to climb down into the caves with a torch. And the caves have, they're very famous, covered in these images. Now, so this pool was independently identified by about 3 different people as being a Taurus image. Now, not all bulls are Taurus. You can have images of bulls that have got nothing to do with Taurus, images of rams that have got nothing to do with Aries. But this particular Taurus, or bull, has 6 dots here. And 3 scholars, including Michael Rappenbluck, who's written most about this, have said these are the Pleiades. Pleiades, a little group of stars. You can see even in the middle of winter. You can even see them from most cities. You probably see them from most parts of London, even the street lights on, if you need where to look. And a dark night sky, they're extremely dramatic. It's the only, the Pleiades are unique night sky as a cluster of bright stars. So, like already noticed, and here, of course, I observed this Rappenbluck published this work, as did a few other people, and all astronomers accept this. The astronomical and archaeological world has reacted to this with acceptance. There's no controversy over these identifications, probably because our archaeologists aren't interested or don't notice, and the astronomers just accept it. And there are also other animals with dots near them, either in the caves, where it gets a bit more controversial and people argue about them. But the bull-taurus association is accepted. So there are the Pleiades, just to make the point, they are very bright. Some people argue about whether there are 6 or 7 stars in the Pleiades. That doesn't really matter. It depends how good your eyesight is. In fact, with a telescope there, you can probably count hundreds. And so there is the bull. You see, there's the Pleiades, there's Taurus. If you were to translate that image into the bull, you'd have the bull's head on the shoulder. The Pleiades here. And there again, this is John Flamsteed's Taurus from the 17th century, and there's the bull's head, and there the Pleiades on the shoulder. And there's Orion the hunter. There's the stars of his belt. So if we go back to Lascaux, there's the bull, exactly as on Flamsteed's 17th century map. There's dots for the Pleiades, and